We are happy to welcome back Chief Michael O'Brien of the Brighton Area Fire Authority. Chief O'Brien also serves as the director of the Fire and Life Safety Section for the International Association of Fire Chiefs. In this episode, we tackle some of the most pressing challenges in fire and life safety, including lithium-ion battery hazards, thermal runaway risks, and the evolution of building codes to address these issues. We'll also dive into community risk reduction and how it's transforming fire service strategies. All right, welcome back to the show, Chief Michael O'Brien of the Brighton Area Fire Authority and the Director of Fire and Life Safety for the International Association of Fire Chiefs. You are our first returning guest, and we're happy to have you, and got a lot of topics to talk about, a lot of emerging topics, and things that I think that a lot of people will find interesting. So, Chief, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim. Looking forward to always a great discussion with you and the work you're doing here on the podcast. So happy to be back.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. Definitely some events that are coming up that we want to showcase, but also too talk about a little bit about lithium-ion battery safety and the code development. We've got a lot of emerging topics. One of those being single exit stairways, and so want to get your perspective, especially as somebody being in the fire service. But before we dive into all of that, if for those that might just be tuning in for the first time, can you give a little bit about your background and maybe reintroduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so currently serving as the fire chief here in Brighton, and I have one of those unique histories or backgrounds in the fire service. I've always had a passion for codes and standards, and that really happened early in my career, growing up in a very much a growing community, which really required me to jump into codes and standards. And it was a very unique time going through, being 20 years old and then telling you to read these NFPA documents in Boca back then. And it was an interesting time. And so as my kind of career went on, I've owned a consulting company where I work with a lot of great communities, helping them solve complex problems. So it's put me in a lot of great spaces. But I had a fire chief that said, hey, look, if you want to influence change, you got to show up. And so back in
Mhm.
about 2003, I showed up to my first code hearing and I had no clue what I was doing. There were these big telephone books and I didn't know what was going on. But ever since then, I've been going back and been involved in codes and standards. I have a lot of background in training, both operational as well as building fire code issues. So really just a passion of mine, just trying to help code officials. I think about my early struggles. We used to look at volumes of books. Now they're just bookmarks on
Mhm.
a web page, but I just have just a passion working with others, trying to help them solve some complex issues. So, uh,
Yeah, you brought up like Boca and all the legacy codes, and now that I think about it, we're going to come very soon. We'll come to a time where people may not remember those or recall those as quickly as they once did. Yeah, I mean, you even highlighted going from volumes of books like I have on the shelf behind me to now digital codes, and soon, having a physical copy in your hand is going to be something totally foreign to, I think, this next generation of code officials.
yeah, not that AI
Uh,
is the topic of today's discussion, but when you look at like
yeah.
premium codes and Lincoln, when you type a topic in, the results you get back that can at least help you with your search back, right? New code officials, we would say, go to the table of contents, go to the index and
Hmm.
start there. Don't ever just start thumbing and opening a
Yeah.
book. But you think about some of the complex issues our code officials are facing, and there's some pretty powerful tools to at least get them in the right spot. I love it. It's a game changer.
Yeah, and one of like you just mentioned AI. I mean, I've even played around with it a little bit in the sense of I want to take this code section, I plug it into whatever your Chat GPT or is it Gronk or whatever it is, whatever your AI engine of
Yeah.
choice is, and then help me better understand this code section. And I'll tell you, for the most part, it does pretty good.
And it pulls up stuff. I have a
Yeah.
dream one day that we're gonna just drop drawings into the AI
Yep.
plan reviewer, and it's at least gonna highlight, redline your document, and come back to you. I mean, you imagine if something could start tracing your travel distances, verify
Uh,
document scale. It's incredible what it could do.
Yeah, like you said, I think that we're probably years away from that, not decades, right? As fast as things have been going. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've seen in the AI space how quickly this stuff is already, what it's producing now. I mean, it's even
Hmm.
producing videos right now.
Incredible.
So,
It can't spell right,
yeah.
but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, yeah. Don't ever ask it to spell something in a image because you'll never get the right thing.
Never.
But eventually, maybe it'll happen. Well,
Yeah.
like you said, it's we're not necessarily talking about AI, but we will. I do want to talk a little bit about technology, and one of the biggest kind of I don't want to say one of the biggest, but an emerging issue within fire and life safety and fire prevention and community risk reduction circles right now is lithium-ion batteries. I mean, we see it
Mm.
in all of our devices. I mean, I've got this speaker that's sitting here, sitting on my desk. I mean, lithium-ion batteries have kind of proliferated, our entire lives. I mean, we're always buying things anywhere from Amazon to Temu now. I mean, you can get anything that comes with a battery and it's rechargeable. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's always certified and tested.
Mm.
And so, with that being said, what do you think are some of the primary challenges associated with, as fire departments or emergency responders, at least responding to incidents involving, batteries?
The response has been overly complicated for a lot of fire service. I think, a couple things right out of the gate is preparation. So if we think of batteries in the built environment, so maybe residential energy storage,
Hmm.
commercial, or any of the things that our inspectors are permitting, there's a lot of work there that can correlate into our operational folks. So you think about all the work we do in codes that we never train our firefighting staff what to work with. You put in a new clean agent system, you put in a certain standpipe system, and we never cross over to training all of our ops people. The same is really happening in the built space with batteries. And there's a lot of great products that are hitting our homes, that are hitting a lot of spaces that are really good vetted products. And then we have all the mobility stuff that's interacting. So when you start to look at the challenges our fire service is having is we have this just absolute onslaught of electrification. Everything
Hmm.
that can is. So we think mobility devices, we think scooters, but you're looking at lawnmowers, you're looking at golf carts. We're seeing more and more devices that come with some kind of battery, and all of those batteries have some kind of end of life. And so, what we do with them when they don't charge anymore, what do we do when we need a new charger, and what do we do when there's a problem are all over the board. And we have a
Hmm.
lot of education that's needed with our community. And I use a very simple example. I don't have one here, but your significant other comes to you and says, hey, I've got this battery pack that I use when I travel. It's one of those ones you just plug your iPhone into.
Right.
It's warm and swollen. What do I do with this? And if your web page, if your community doesn't have that answer, most of our public is typically pretty smart to say we shouldn't charge it anymore. And then we've got the next layer who are like, maybe I should keep this out of our house. But if there isn't a way to collect that, recycle it, get it out of the waste stream, most of our people throw it away. So,
Right.
if we think about all the layers that comes, we've got a lot of work to do in training our general public about what's best for batteries. And
Hmm.
it really adopts a philosophy of if something happens, say something. Because
Yeah.
our number one instinct, if something stops working that's electronic, is to charge it.
Yeah.
And so it's very simple for us to say, hey, look, do you have the right charger for the right piece of equipment? And we could probably back up before that. Did you buy the right piece of equipment? And
Right.
it's easy with UL, or
Hmm.
it's easy with iPhone, Samsung.
Yep.
It's hard with bikes. So, Tim, we're mostly code officials and it's Christmas time. A lot of people are out shopping or they're off this time of year. Go to your local sports store and go to where they're selling electric go-karts, go to where they're selling electric bikes, and tell me if you can figure out on the packaging if it's listed
I,
and what's
yeah.
listed.
No, not
It's
at all. Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're putting it right on the front of the package to say, I'm bringing this product into my house and it's going to be safe. I mean, we all have the belief that anything that we buy is going to be safe, but you're not, yeah. How do you know, right? You just have
well,
that trust.
and then it's further complicated. You have a plug-in vacuum. I don't want to use anybody's name, but you have a one of those vacuums that hang on the
Right.
wall that
Yep.
charges.
Yep.
And you're like, man, I'm relatively handy. This battery, it's not holding a charge anymore. So you pull that battery, you go online, you go to buy one. and you think you're buying a replacement, but it's maybe a
Right.
hidden letter. It's not a
Yep.
full true replacement. So we've got a lot of work in the use space to make sure people are up to speed and our residents understand best practices, right charger, only use the replacement batteries, don't tinker with battery packs. And when you start to see signs of failure or you've caused trauma, stop using it and get it to collection. And we've just got a lot of work to do because it's so difficult. We're seeing fire speeds way faster. We're seeing
Hmm.
unpredictability. We used to have time. You see a little smoke or you'd see a puff of smoke out of something. You had time to react. And right now, some of these bikes and other products, when they fail, man, they can create a flashover situation in under 20 seconds with
Yeah.
almost a boom or a deflagration or an
Yep.
explosion. And it's just creating a real tough built environment that when they fail just so catastrophically and so fast.
Yeah, in that video from FSRI on how quickly that e-bike, or it was an e-scooter, failed and then ended up having a pretty good explosion and pushing out windows and doors and things like that. I mean, it is quick. It is quick to see how quickly these things can, or scary to see how quickly these things can explode, or how quickly these things can fail. And one of the things that I think about too, like you just mentioned, the chargers. You can buy aftermarket chargers for these things all the time. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had I had a battery operated device, and I couldn't find, being in this profession, I went to try to find a replacement cable so that way I could charge it, because I understood that I needed to get through the actual replacement cable from the manufacturer, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I went to their website, I went to, all your e-commerce sites, and I couldn't find a charger for it. I could find a charger, but not one specifically for that device. And I had to stop using it. And because I knew better, and also too, being in the fire service, understanding batteries and talking to people like yourself, my family is not necessarily as well informed, or I try to inform them, but they may not necessarily follow all the stuff that I preach to them. And they bought something where it was an electric fly swatter, where it looked like a tennis racket.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and I was
Yep.
like, hey, that's great. Let's take a look at see if it's listed or if there's a battery. Nope. And given that I follow a lot of a lot of lithium-ion battery fire failures and seeing the different products that fail from time to time, I said, we're going to put a pause on this, and maybe we won't use this, and we'll maybe think of something else, or maybe you're just your good old-fashioned fly swatter, the mechanical version of it. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary. I mean, there are a lot of things out there that you could definitely, could shape and have issues.
You think about this. I think us as code officials, as fire service, we're always in education mode.
Hmm.
And most people, when we say lithium ion batteries, they don't know what products do and don't.
Right.
But when we start to change to rechargeable devices, when we start to have those conversations and educate, there's so many opportunities for us to have these conversations. You think of all the inspectors that are out right now doing inspections, and we think about how portable devices are affecting our construction industry.
Hmm.
So we've done a lot on construction fire safety over the last couple of years.
Yep.
Think about the work we all could be doing on battery construction safety and how we're starting to see unique new sources, portable, small, large batteries coming into construction sites. And then when you start to see the finished environment, look at some of our tool cribs in our commercial setting, both the equipment that's getting charged and the like. But let's say you open up a beautiful, I don't know if anybody's building four-story office buildings anymore, but you think about a beautiful four-story office building. Am I allowed to take my e-bike to the fourth floor?
Oh,
And when buildings don't have, like, so we think our homes, we think our own garages, but
right.
sometimes when we wear a code official hat, think about those same products being taken in an elevator up to the fourth floor. And on the surface, we're like, why would you do that? But some of our communities, you don't want to leave stuff outside. You don't want
Right.
to leave. So if you don't give charging rooms, you don't give spaces on the first floor, what happens and how do we do it? And I think we're going to see this evolution in our shared residential space settings. I think we're going to see it in our building environment where we take a lot of this lesson learned
Hmm.
and apply it to our larger built environment. And I would just tell a lot of code officials, jump into it.
Yeah.
Get curious. Go
Yep.
look. Like, look
Yeah.
at the stuff you use and
Yeah.
see if you can solve it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I think we should probably talk about is, we're talking about lithium-ion batteries and how they fail, but what are some of the common causes of failures for lithium-ion batteries? And can you maybe give a description of what, we always use the term thermal runaway, but what is thermal runaway?
So, very few of our products are a singular cell. They're a series of cells within a product. Our iPhones, iPads, cellular, Samsung devices, those are a single pouch style cell. So, everything with batteries starts at a cell level, and then we can take multiple cells, put them together. Most of the time, we refer to those as modules. So, if I were to take apart a battery pack that's on an e-bike or an e-scooter, an electronic bike or scooter, you would see a series of batteries connected together
Hmm.
in that container. So, reasons batteries fail typically are we have an over undercharge issue. That's typically where there's a failure. We have over temperature, right? So, something overheats. Typically, it's what we call cell to cell propagation, which we'll talk about in a second. We can have a lot of mechanical failures as well. And mechanical can come in from things like crushing, pinching, but it can also be we're borderline when we start to get things wet that shouldn't
Right.
be wet. And then we have just bad product design, cell failure. Now, the cells we put in an e-bike, e-mobility that's listed are different than ones that are not. Likewise, what we put in your car, way different quality cells than
Hmm.
what's in a vape pen. And so when they start to fail, typically we start to see smoke, and most of us refer to that as off-gassing. So depending on how the cell, so if you think cylindrical cell like a C cell, D cell, they're a little bit different in size, but I'm just trying to say that's a cylindrical cell.
Right.
We have pouch cells, which look like aluminum foil. We can have prismatic cells, which are typically inside of like a box. So they all fail very similarly. They give off-gassing, which is a big mix of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and some flammable gases mixed in
Hmm.
there. So, depending on the chemistry of the cell, depends on what's going to happen. But typically, after we get gas, we're going to get a jetting flame. So, in that singular device with one cell, it's one and done. In those with those chains of cells, we get this thermal runaway event where it's this uncontrolled burning. It's a chemical chain reaction we can't stop. And
Right.
that's the hardest part for a lot of people is we're really looking at a 3D fire that we don't have a product to stop it. So the way it stops is it burns out of that fuel. But in that process of heating, it's heating up the adjacent cells. So even though the other cells might not have been compromised by the initial event, we're now
Hmm.
heating. And so, people will report, I heard multiple pops, I heard bangs, I heard whatever. And it's those cells going through that thermal event, and it's kind of that cascading. Inside the packs, there's a lot of things to hopefully keep it safe. That's why listed products are usually a little bit better. We have
Right.
separators, we have battery management systems. There's a lot of things to help keep that battery, what I would call homeostasis, keep it happy.
Yep.
But from time to time, when we make batteries unhappy, when we make them sick, they start having a problem and you
Yeah.
can't stop that chain. And that's the hardest part for people to understand is it is such a fast moving fire. We used to call fires fast in the residential space. We'd light a
Right.
couch on fire in 3 hours, not 3 hours,
3 minutes.
3 minutes. That
Yeah.
that space is non-tenable.
Yep.
20, 30 seconds were non-tenable.
Right.
It's really a new challenge for us.
Well, and I don't know. Have you seen the research that NIST is doing on trying to develop some level of detection for battery failures? What is it? The click and hiss of
Hmm.
or the pop and hiss of the initial failure, and then the gas release. Have you seen? At least they're thinking that maybe they have up to 2 minutes to be able to test it and maybe develop an AI detector.
That's if we probably look well beyond today, there's a lot of really cool work happening both in our
Hmm.
federal partners or federal labs or universities where they're really trying to solve a lot of these. And I think that's the exciting part is we're going to
Yeah.
see a lot of help. The same battery made a year ago, we're going to see a lot better cell design. We're seeing that already in the automotive space, where we think about all the testing on EV packs from a crash
Mm.
requirement. You think of all the things our vehicles have to go through. The cell packs that were made 5, 6 years ago can't stand up to the ones made today. Our engineers are
Right.
making these really cool products that can really start to take a hit, for lack of better terms, and they
Hmm.
don't just go into thermal events. And so, whether it's that NIST study where they're starting to say, hey, look, we can do better, we can pick up on some of these things, I think the
Yeah.
manufacturers, especially in the really good quality products, are starting to find ways to get better.
Yeah. And I think kind of hoverboards is a good example, right? Of how
Yeah,
quickly, that came in, and then how quickly, UL worked with hoverboard manufacturers and government agencies to be able to make that a little bit safer. So
yeah,
I think that we're going in the right direction. It's just going to take us some time.
yeah, for sure.
But, as we talk a little bit about, you kind of hit on building code and code development and, that 4-story office space and finding areas maybe like treating our built environment to be able to accommodate some of these items. One of the areas that I also see, and you hit on it earlier, was recycling of batteries. We
Mm.
definitely see a lot of recycling, battery recycling facilities will have an incident because of different things that happen. I have seen it in my own department where somebody brought in some pouch batteries from a laptop, and they were swollen, and we knew that we should not keep them in the building, so we took them off
Yeah.
and packaged them and got rid of them. But it's still happening. And as you mentioned, those that may identify that the battery is warm, it's swollen. The first thing is not to recharge it, but then the next thing is to get it out of my home. But where do I take it? And so I think that that's an area of code development that hopefully we can kind of get to on battery recycling. But as we talk about that, how do building and fire codes really try to address the hazards of lithium-ion batteries? And what areas do you see that could be potential improvements?
So overall, that's a very interesting topic. The International Code Council last March, the board started an ad hoc committee to really take a deep dive into open code areas that are affecting. And so a draft report is really in the works, and I
Hmm.
think that's going to help us lay a lot of foundation. One of the things that's really been happening is the 2024 codes have done a phenomenal job at starting to address the built environment for batteries in all those spaces. If you think about the manufacturing and lab space in the United States has just gone through the roof. And
Hmm.
24 IBC IFC was really the first time we start to cover these products, whether it's sprinkler requirements detection, but there's mobility requirements now in
Hmm.
Chapter 3 of the Fire Code. We have a lot of other requirements as well, trying to tackle a lot of these products and help give guidance to code officials. The code development process for the next edition, the 2027 of the I codes, Group A had 70, 80 changes
Wow.
from anything in energy storage to mobility. So definitely a lot of work is coming. And I think that's the interesting part for a lot of our code officials. They're like, but hold on, I'm on the 21. I'm on,
Yeah.
California is leading the way. You guys
Right.
brought forward a lot of the codes,
Hmm.
and it's in your 2022 code documents.
Yep.
But the rest of the US or the rest of the world, this is where your chapter 1 comes in that allows code officials to go get language to help
Yeah.
them in some of these places. Codes are really trying to lay some groundwork in protecting these spaces, realizing some of the challenges.
Hmm.
And the viewpoint is so different. If you don't have a battery plant, it's hard for some people to realize the spaces, but everybody has probably an automotive repair facility.
Yeah.
And you think of the challenges as our number of EV vehicles on the road increase, there's a lot of challenges to our built environment. And so there's no doubt the belts and suspenders here are sprinklers, alarms, emergency, what we would call the ERP, the emergency response plan. We know occupancies of building in chapter 4 of the fire code is one of the most underutilized things that we all use. We think fire drills, we think testing, whatever.
Right.
ERPs for batteries are different, and it should be forcing our built environment to have conversations with their employees on best practices.
Hmm.
Because depending on what you're doing, let's stay in that automotive repair. There's a lot that needs to take place when we have damaged vehicles stored outside. There's a lot that needs to take place to when we're maybe removing an EV battery pack to service the vehicle and put it back, or maybe we're putting new battery packs or we're storing battery packs as part of a recall process. Well, what are those best practices? Because the hazards are different. So you'll
Hmm.
see this, that belt and suspender sprinklers detection in a lot of spaces now, but the ERP is so critical. And then when we get into larger, what's called state of charge, we have additional requirements that are layered in. But really, the code committees, the Fire Code Action Committee, have done a phenomenal job within the IC at really trying to help code officials start to address this issue. I think just the biggest part is so many code officials don't realize it's there because they're on the 2021, 2018,
Right.
or 2015. They haven't bought the book, or they don't have premium. And so just trying to get them to realize, hey, there's some tools here. You don't need to make this stuff up. Start using and bringing that forward in your code administration. And we're seeing a lot of really good success stories across the country on that, where people are, one of the biggest topics is EV charging and parking decks. It's a hot topic politically. And so when we don't allow high quality charging, it gets made up.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. So we have this very balance of what are the safety precautions? Is there an increase in fires? And most of the time when you start looking at the data isn't there to support this overly complex system, but there's a lot to support. It's a different fire than what we're used to. So a
Yep.
lot of work's being done in that space to try to standardize. I think you're going to see a lot about parking and EV charging in the 2027 codes. There's a lot in play there, but I would just really encourage people to start looking at the 2024 Chapter 3, Chapter 9. You're going to see a lot of the requirements in the fire code for those.
Yeah. I've attended many of your classes as it relates back to battery safety. You definitely are very active and provide a lot of great information to the fire service, but also code officials. And in one of your slides, I remember you show a delivery driver that is plugging it in almost with an extension cord, because like you just said, some places we don't have quality charging and we're going to have a failure. I saw a story, I want to say a couple months ago, about a car that was on a lift at a mechanic repair shop, and the battery failed. And they were trying to figure out, how do we get the car down? How do we get the car out of the garage to stop the fire event from happening inside? And those are all things that I think that as the fire service, we have to start thinking about, especially in our emergency response. What recommendations do you have to ensure firefighters are adequately prepared for lithium-ion battery fires? I mean, there's been a lot of products that have been suggested, a lot of products that are being developed to be able to address it. But what are some of the things that you're doing in your department to make sure that your department's ready for lithium-ion battery fires?
I think every firefighter should have a battery awareness 101. So a lot of what we've already talked about, from mobility to EV to energy storage.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things that we've got to get them comfortable speaking and understanding the hazards that are associated. I think a lot of the complications we're seeing is when we haven't given that to fire crews and they're figuring it out on the fly. I have found that fire crews thrive when they have lots of good information and they have at least a plan A or a plan B for them to start to deal with. And I think it complicates as we go on. So we need to make sure our training is matched to the hazards in our community that they're going to see. So it's really easy to bring them the 101 on mobility and EV response indoors in local energy storage. And so what we have done is really try to give our crews standard actions. Our entire organization got what I would call Battery 101.
Mm-hmm.
In that process, we ramped up our skills with our hazardous materials technician for battery collection. And where this plays in is in the residential space. We didn't want to leave that battery pack on a fire ground knowing that there could be a secondary event. So you think structural firefighting, the first thing, we get our fires knocked down, then we are looking for signs of batteries and other things. And before a full extensive overhaul is done, we want to get those products outside and accounted for. And that's where our technicians come in, is later on that day, the next day, they will overpack those batteries, and that way we can hold them. So the battery pack may have started the fire, or maybe it didn't, but it was associated. So our goal is no secondary fires. So just pause and think of the standard garage. How many batteries are in a garage?
Yeah.
And you think about
Hundreds.
drill motors. Yeah.
Yep.
And so if we don't take care of those, but they were all thermally compromised, the likelihood of a rekindle is very, very high. And
Mm-hmm.
so we might need some partnerships with board up restoration companies and help having conversation with them. Because there was an instance, I was teaching a class where he said, hey, look, you got to take care of battery packs. And this chief called me down the road and he said, hey, we did that. We got the scooter outside. But when they started the cleanup of the site, that battery pack got jostled enough and it caught the dumpster on fire, which then
Oh,
caught the house
jeez.
on fire a second time. And so when you think about, if we don't lean into this to help start the mitigation process, that's where we have these secondary events. So
Mm-hmm.
we really started there. And then when we get into the EV space, it's about building standard actions. And then we try to reduce the difficult decision making. So EVs, we're seeing a lot right now where people are getting trapped inside the vehicles. And so we wanted to bring this awareness. It's not limited to EV. It's limited to any of the vehicles that are these fly-by-wire. So back where our door opening devices in our car used to be a true handle that pulled um, a lever that or a wire that opened the latch,
Right.
we're now seeing what I would call locks by wire. You push a button and something else. Well, if you lose your 12 volt, the low voltage in your vehicle, I don't care if it's gas or electric, your door's not opening. Now, there's a
Hmm.
secondary way, but most people don't know. And then when we add complications of laminated glass for our response crews, they struggle bus. For us, it was how do we create these standard actions? So we kind of pooled our staff together and said, hey, where do you think you're going to see an EV, right? So we got roadway, we got parking lot next to vehicles, and we have inside garages. It could be residential setting or commercial setting garages. So what we decided is, okay, what would be our standard action? Well, first off, firefighters, we got to tell them what to wear. We got, right, awareness. We talked about face pieces and protecting themselves. So pull up, protect your work environment like you
Mm-hmm.
normally would. And what do our bosses do on every home fire? They do a 360. So what we said is on all of our vehicles, let's get back. I don't care if it's vehicle accidents, vehicle fires, let's get back to 360s. So we're looking for occupants that are trapped. We're looking for vehicle propulsion type. We're looking for exposures and hazards for our firefighters. They're going to come back, and that's when they're going to deem what else they need to do. And so we want them to start to use the words, we have an EV, we have an electric hazard. And so we're kind of raising that bar and we're
Okay.
creating that standard action for our staff. And then it's really simple after that. We're still going to deploy hand lines. We're probably going to use water as a diagnostic tool. It's okay to spray 500 gallons and realize something's not right here.
Right.
And so it's okay. But if we got people trapped or we've got exposures, we're going to work like mad to keep those exposures cool. We're going to get that person out of that vehicle. And that may mean training firefighters to work in SCBA. It may mean training firefighters to deploy. So we've purchased some blankets for some of our exposure protection inside of vehicle firefighting. We've developed some policies for things like turnout gear cleaning. So if we add
Mm.
proximity or pressure, so indoor firefighting of EVs or other battery fires, we're going to ship that gear out to get carbon dioxide clean, liquid. There's liquid carbon dioxide, one in Denver, one in Minnesota. We use a
Okay.
company called ETDcon. And so we ship that gear off. So we have seen some pretty decent success. It's really been recognition. So if you think that very simple mobility, home fire,
Mm-hmm.
and what do we want that general firefighter to do? Recognize, report, get
Right.
action. And then we can get as complicated as EVs on the freeway, and we give them those tools to start making decisions because it's at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's a lieutenant on an engine on the freeway that's
Yeah.
going to have to make a decision. And we want to give them all the stuff we can. And we learn a lot from everybody else and just seeing what else is out there.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points. I mean, I had not necessarily heard about the hazard associated with people getting trapped in their vehicles because, you have a 12-volt battery that fails, and now
Hmm.
they can't get out. And so those are all, definitely, valuable tools to, or valuable information, but also too how battery fires can maybe continue the fire event later on, and then overpacking them. And we talk about the number of batteries that we have in our homes and how do we avoid that because now they've all been thermally compromised. And so make sure to get those out of our home before we start another fire. And then we have to call the fire department back. But definitely scary things, especially with now the impacts that it can have on personal protective equipment and making sure that we're not exposing firefighters to some of those hazardous chemicals as we continue to move forward. Because that is definitely something that we look at quite extensively,
Hmm.
especially even before these types of fires. But before we were looking at different causes of or impacts to firefighters.
And I love whiteboards. And what I would say is if I were to ever roll this into community risk reduction, here's the thing for fire chiefs, fire marshals, building code officials. You don't have to have the answers for your community. You just got to figure out. You might say, hey, so many chiefs tell me, they're like, we don't have a battery problem. I'm like, you're not looking. I guarantee
Hmm.
you do. You're just not looking yet. And so, what I would say from a CRR perspective, get the right people in the room. Get your police chief, get your building
Yeah.
official, fire marshal, fire chief. If you just want to stay in the fire department, get your battalions, your shift supervisors, your fire marshal, your investigators, your training people, and say, okay, batteries, mobility. How do we handle this?
Hmm.
What happens if your fire crew gets on the third floor of an apartment building and they see an e-bike, e-scooter that is venting gas? Do they have the tools? We bought 4-foot blankets for them so that if they got to that situation, because every firefighter says they're going to pick it up and throw it outside. Well, it is jetting flames that will
Right.
burn through our gear. So how do we help prepare them? So my point being, use CRR, use community risk reduction to get the right people in the room and start having dialogue. It's not just on the fire service to answer this question. Your community might have a battery czar that their
Right.
job, and that you just don't know because they're over in City Hall, but they collect all these batteries.
Yep.
Well, why couldn't you have a question or talk with them about how do we pick up lithium ion? How
Yeah.
do we add community recycling to our waste hazardous days? Maybe it's not in your community, maybe it's at your county, maybe it's within your state. And I would just say that the one thing fire service is really good at is getting people together
Yeah.
and driving those conversations, because a lot of the building code officials are like, Mike, I never knew any of this. And it drives ERPs, it drives
Hmm.
the code environment as well, because we have to supplement all of these processes back to our codes and standards and
All
how
right.
we're permitting occupancies.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you made the shift to community risk reduction because I'd like to talk a little bit about that. We've talked quite a bit, quite a bit about lithium-ion batteries, and I'm sure we could talk the rest of the hour on that. But I
Yeah.
do want to talk a little bit about it, in the sense of we have the leadership conference for 2025 coming. The International Association of Fire Chiefs Community Risk Reduction Conference is scheduled for May. I have the
Yeah.
dates here: May 13th through the 15th of 2025. Which it's weird to say May of 2025, but we
Yeah.
are there. It's scheduled in Glendale, but we talk about community risk reduction. One, I want to talk about like who is this conference geared towards? I mean, yeah, fire code officials. I mean, you hit on some of those others. Maybe a building official. Maybe those that are our waste collection people for batteries or battery recyclers. What are the main objectives for the conference? Who should attend, and what can what can attendees expect to obtain from the conference?
Yes, so there's some competition in the CRR education space all across. And what I would say is what probably sets the IFC apart is it's all the big people in the room
Hmm.
that are leading this across the US and abroad, really. And we have folks from all over North America. We have folks from over the pond in Europe that come to this conference. And I used to think, hey, it was for leadership. It's for people in leadership perspective. And we've always aimed it. But there is no rank really assigned to this.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had fire chiefs that have come up and I've talked to who are like, I'm here because I know I'm supposed to be doing this and I don't know where to start. And so we've had that recognition. We met some building code officials at last year's conference, which was really neat to see. They took a community approach. We had some city managers as well. So CRR, it plays such a big role that goes well beyond the fire service. When you think about the overuse of our paramedics
Mm-hmm.
across the country, they
Yeah.
are solving problems. And CRR, right, we call it community paramedicine. It's probably chasing some data to go figure out where a thing is. But what I love about this conference is it just lights a fire under anybody who's touching this stuff. And we've got some great presentations coming up. We're working on finalizing. We have a great planning committee that is finalizing all the classes and the details. And it always has some great keynotes from way different aspects. But if you're like, I don't know about CRR, you should be there. If you are in CRR, you should be there, because I have learned more from our vendors. I've learned more from people speaking, and I'm blessed. I get to be at a lot of conferences to teach and others, and I always look forward to CRR being able to sit in these classes and learn from just about everybody with their programs. And I always find some nugget to take back,
Yeah.
and that's just where I kind of come in here, because it doesn't matter what your badge says, it doesn't matter
Right.
what your uniform shirt is. I think it's just a place filled with people trying to reduce. I always use the phrase that part of our role, actually, it's in our oath. for all of our firefighters, that they will actively work to reduce the impact of fire on our communities. And we use the word fire because it would be really long to say EMS and everything else.
Right.
But you think of all the work our people do in trying to educate, to reduce injuries, to reduce death in so many aspects. That's where this conference comes in. We sent some young staff and they were just lit on fire, and they've already done some great things. They brought some stuff back here to Brighton, and that's that opportunity that we want to do. We want to create some of those aha moments, and we're
Right.
excited. Glendale, if you haven't been there, especially from a Midwest guy who's trying to come out of the winter grays in Michigan, it's a beautiful place to be in May.
Yeah. Well, definitely excited. I hope to make it this year. I haven't made it in years past. And to be around other like-minded individuals, especially as part of that are focused on CRR. And as we talk about risk, I think that as you hit on it, it's not just fire, it's EMS, it's all the things that our community faces every day. And we try to implement strategies, and it's not just from the fire marshal or the fire department coming up with solutions. It typically is a team effort to work together and maybe bring your building official with you when you attend, or maybe bring others with you, your code enforcement supervisor, or others that might also benefit from this conference.
And it's okay to bring people assigned to engines and trucks,
Yes, that too. Yeah.
because we need them on the street making a difference. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Now, I kind of want to pivot a little bit back to maybe some of the code development stuff that we talked about. And this probably will be a topic, I would imagine, at the CRR Leadership
Yeah.
Conference, but single exit stairways, right? Single exit stairways, we've seen a lot of proposals going across Northern America. And, there are some, I understand the different perspectives associated with this topic. But as a fire chief, what are some of the things or potential impacts that you see as it relates back to building safety and emergency response as it relates to single exit stairways?
A lot of the U.S. Fire Service is protected by two people in a fire truck. And, when the single exit stair concept really emerged, Seattle was one of the first big cities whose staffing level is much more than two people in a fire truck, with a lot of staffed ladder companies, engine companies, those.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to look at the challenges that could present to fire crews on some of these structures, staffing makes a difference when you've got to raise a 35-foot ladder to a third or a fourth floor window to try to attempt a rescue where somebody might be trapped.
Right.
And I think, for the most part, in this proposal that has come forward, we have a lot of communities that are challenged in so many different ways in trying to fix housing for their community.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a homeless issue. It could be just landlocked issue. It could be a price issue. It doesn't matter. And so what I love about the code process, there's a lot of opinions on this. And it right now where we sit today, there was a proposal submitted both in ICC and NFPA. They're similar but different about allowing and getting closer to that 6-story single exit building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the most part, when you think generally that most of the US is protected by two people in a fire truck. I mean, they have multiple units, but realistically, how do we blend this? And so
Right.
there was a lot of work done, and a proposal modification came through where we looked at, or it was proposed, instead of 6, the ICC would allow a 3-story single
Mm-hmm.
exit building with residential sprinklers. It's been bumped up to 4 stories. The various code committees, as part of the 2027, did approve that. There's a last step which won't take place till 2026
Right.
as part of the ICC process. My face is because I don't want to say the word 2026. But that's its last step there, is to see if the membership of the ICC will take that. There's a whole bunch of other things that are added
Right.
into this. But the hope is that a lot of these community proposals that are happening might take a look at what the ICC is doing and point back to those. And I think that's the best thing we can do, is make sure we stay with our model building and fire codes, because when
Mm-hmm.
we have legislative bodies starting to pull things without the full technical picture,
Right.
it can get tough. I mean, every community has the right to amend their fire code and building codes, But boy, does it make it hard on developers. It makes it hard on enforcement. It makes it hard all over when they're all over the place. And so I think that some good compromise took place. It's not perfect, and both sides don't like it, which tells me we're probably pretty close to where
Close.
it's supposed to be.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you think about, I'll even give you a four-person company. Trying to raise a 35-foot ladder in a hurry to get somebody is a tough situation
Hmm.
for our fire crews, understanding how fast fire moves nowadays. So, I think the proposal, hey, anybody can submit code changes. And that's maybe the beautiful thing about our process. So, but it's on all of us to stay actively engaged because boy has this been a big issue in so many communities, a
Yep.
lot of legislative processes to address this, but I really think a good compromise is in place with the four. It matches NFPA 101, which has allowed four-story for some time. But yeah, it's not perfect, but we'll see what the membership does in 2026.
Well, I think you hit on, the idea of a consensus process, right? Being able to get all the people from both sides in the room, have a discussion about it, and how do we balance the need for economic development, community development, but then also how is it going to impact the fire and life safety of those occupants and the firefighters that are responding. And I think that that's part of what that code development process is. And I think that there is, I mean, being in California, we do have a big housing need, and so how do we do that? And how do we balance it? And how do we do it safely? I think that those are all things that I think both sides are definitely trying to do. I would think that trying to work together, and it's good to see that now we're starting to see a little bit of a consensus, and hopefully we can kind of build off of that.
It is so easy as a fire person to go, no.
Yeah.
But what's the phrase? Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Yeah.
And so I think that goes twofold, especially with our community leaders. It's easy to get stuck in the fire chief's office. It's easy to get stuck in the fire marshal's office. And this is where we just sometimes have to go buy some coffee, have some dialogue with our people in City Hall, with our community leaders, and even in the case of code development. We got to find the people who are passionate and have
Hmm.
some real discussions, regardless of how challenging they are. And sometimes we just have to listen to understand first. So I
Yeah.
think you're right. Consensus, the moment we lose our consensus process, we usually end up with bad code and standard.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talk about the ICC process is a consensus process, and even NFPA. And I think that as we start to develop these, we get all the people that have different perspectives, and people have unique perspectives really across the country. I mean, you hit on Seattle and how they've done it, and even
Hmm.
Seattle will comment on what's worked well for us, what hasn't, and those impacts that we see. And as you mentioned, having most of the country covered by two people in a fire engine, is that code proposal going to how is that code proposal going to impact them? And I think that we have to have that holistic approach and really take a wide look at this. And it's good to see that we're having that dialogue and those discussions. I know NFPA had the single exit stairway symposium,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's a great document. I don't know if anybody's read that. It's a long document, but it's a good document. And I know that the International Association of Fire Chiefs was part of that discussion as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just say, hey, look, over the years, sometimes we do show and tell with our community leaders. And for lack of better terms, I made some of our local leaders get in the driver's seat of our ladder truck.
Mm,
We had some questions here locally, and I'm like, you can go drive it in the parking lot. And they're like, you're going to let me drive this ladder truck? And of course, we gave them
a
we
lot
made
of
sure
room.
there was a lot of room, but they didn't realize like that's a big rig. And so
Yeah.
there was a lot of conversations, about setbacks and fire access roads. And so many times we tried our best to educate. And we would even ask questions like, how fast do you think a well-trained fire crew can get on the roof of a building or raise a 35-foot ladder? And 1 minute, 2 minutes. And so we really started the process. We let them do it sometimes. We let them try it, 10,
Hmm.
15 minutes. And then we showed our really well-trained ninjas go out and do something. And I think maybe part of it's my education background. I wanted to create aha moments for them to support their firefighters. I didn't always want the fire chief or the fire marshal being the one saying no.
Right.
I wanted them to understand the limitations that were placed on our staff. And, nobody ever pre-plans a fire, right? Nobody ever pre-plans an emergency. And so that should always be the complication. And so I think the single exit stairway is sometimes a great place where we can at least have some of those conversations.
Hmm.
But also, is there an opportunity for the fire service to help support it in other ways?
Right.
But we've got to be honest. I don't want us just to roll over and say, hey, there's no issue here,
Right.
because firefighters will do Herculean things to
Hmm.
save a life.
Yep.
And if we can prevent a fire, we can prevent something from ever occurring, that will always help reduce injury and death to our firefighters. And right, it's saving the public in the process. And so it's a tough road for us. And it's so easy just to say no, but sometimes we have to listen, and maybe there is an opportunity somewhere else for us to
Right.
help.
Yeah. Yeah, nope. Fantastic perspective that I think that, many that are working on this issue, not only this issue, but even lithium ion battery fires, right? We could say no to batteries too, but I think that that's not going to happen either. So how do we continue to engage in dialogue and have these discussions to be able to improve safety? And I think that we all need to be able to do that. And I think it's going to help us as we continue to evolve. I think that things are coming at us very quickly, and how do we respond to them? And I think as somebody that's in community risk reduction and somebody that is in the fire service, being part of that process is definitely going to be beneficial for not only the fire department but also the community as a whole. All right, Chief. Well, we are at 54 minutes. I thought I'd look down at the clock, and I want to give you an opportunity if you want to share a little bit more where people can find more information about yourself, but also the International Association of Fire Chiefs and all the good work that you
Yeah.
guys are doing.
You can always catch up with me on Facebook and Instagram. I think I'm at Inspector 911. And you can hunt me down on LinkedIn. That's a little bit more professional if you don't want to see pictures of my kids playing in marching band and things like that. So over on LinkedIn, I'm always trying to post good things there. And I'm on X as well at Inspector 911. And that I really do a lot of code related items. For the International Association of Fire Chiefs, if you forget, just search IAFC CRRL, but it's iafc.org/CRRL. You can get registered, grab your hotel. A lot of stuff is coming up with that, but May 13th through 15th in Glendale, Arizona, we'd love to see that room filled. It has grown by 100 people every year, and so it's been so exciting to be a part of that. And it's so awesome to see the work that so many of our members are doing to make that a successful event.
Yeah, yeah, and let's see if we can make it another 100 this year and
That'd be
continue
great.
to build on community risk reduction. That'd be fantastic. All right, Chief. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Tim. Have a great day.
All right, thanks, you too.